Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 15 of The Devil and the Deep Blue Me, and I am your host, Rich Bruck. Well, my friends, today we're tackling the big one. The question that probably sits in the back of all of our minds, especially as we get older, as more of life is behind us than ahead of us. What makes a life well lived? And this is the question, isn't it? The one that we circle back to over and over again, especially in quiet moments, or when you're lying awake at night, when you're at a funeral, or when you're facing a birthday that feels like a milestone, or when you're wondering if the choices you've made add up to something meaningful. And I've been thinking about this a little bit more lately than usual. Not in a morbid or anxious way, but in that natural way that comes with being later on in your life, with having lived long enough to see patterns, to have some perspective, to know that time is finite and choices do matter. For a long time, I thought a well-lived life meant success, achievements, recognition, being good at something important. And then I thought it was about love, finding that right person or building the right relationships or being connected. And then I thought it was about legacy, leaving something behind, making a mark, being remembered. And now what I know is that it's none of those alone. It's the weave of all of them. And it's also a little more simple and a little more complex than any one single answer. A life well lived is not about perfection. It's about participation. It's about showing up. Messy, flawed, uncertain, and still daring to love and daring to create or to give or to risk. So today, for this episode, I want to explore what I have come to believe about living well. Not as someone who has it all figured out, of course, but as someone who has thought about it a lot while continuing to stumble through. The question underneath almost every other question is about how to live. What makes it worth it? What constitutes a life that at the end you could look back and think, well, that was good. That mattered. I'm glad I did that. When I was younger, I thought I knew the answer. A well-lived life meant success, achieving things, being recognized for your abilities, having status or wealth or even fame. The external markers that society tells you mean that you've made it, that you've used your life well. But then I'd achieve small versions of those things. I'd, win a competition or get recognition for a performance or have moments of success, and they would feel good for a day, maybe a week, and then they would kind of fade away. The satisfaction was real, but it was temporary, and it didn't fill whatever was empty in the way that, I expected it to. So then I thought, well, it must be about love, finding the right person, building the right relationships, being connected to people who matter. And that got closer to something real because relationships do seem to be fundamental to a life that feels meaningful. But even that wasn't complete because relationships can be messy and complicated, and sometimes they end or they change or they fail to live up to their promise. And if your whole sense of living well depends on other people, well, you're giving away your agency in a way that feels precarious. And then I thought it was about legacy, leaving something behind, making a mark on the world and being remembered. And for me, that meant music, creating songs that might outlive me or teaching students who would carry forward what I'd shared with them, contributing something to the world of art. And legacy matters, I think, but it's also mostly beyond your control. You can't determine what survives you, what gets remembered, whether your contributions end up being significant to anyone else. And making that the measure of a life well lived, well, it puts the judgment in other people's hands in an uncertain future. And now what I know is that it's all of those things woven together, but also something simpler underneath them all. A life well lived is not about perfection. It's not about getting everything right or avoiding all mistakes or being consistently happy or successful. It's about participation. It's about showing up to your actual life instead of waiting for some better, clearer, more perfect version to begin. It's about being present with what is, engaging with the people and the experiences that are actually here, and saying yes to risk and connection and meaning, even when you're uncertain about it. Showing up is messy, it's flawed, it's uncertain, and then still daring to love or to create or to give or to risk, not because you've figured it all out, not because you're confident you won't fail, but because that's what being alive seems to require if you want it to feel meaningful. So let me start with what I think a well-lived life is not. It's not the absence of regret. It's not a flawless record. It's not never making mistakes or always choosing correctly or avoiding pain and difficulty. There's this narrative about living with regrets, about making choices you'll never look back on with anything but satisfaction. And I think that's not only impossible, but actually misses something very important about how humans learn and grow. I have regrets. Relationships I didn't fight harder for, or creative risks I didn't take when I had the chance. Times I chose comfort over growth and safety over possibility. Words that I said that I wish I could take back. Years I spent pursuing things that didn't actually even matter. But those regrets have also taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. They've clarified what actually matters to me, shown me who I want to be by showing me who I don't want to be. They've made me more compassionate towards others who are struggling or failing because I know how that feels. So instead of the absence of regret, I think a well-lived life is about the presence of meaning, about making choices that feel aligned with what you care about. Even when those choices are difficult, even when they don't lead to conventional success. It's about whether you're generally moving in a direction that feels right to you, whether you're learning from your mistakes instead of just repeating them, or whether you're becoming more yourself rather than less over time. It's not about leaving behind a flawless story, but about leaving behind an authentic one. A story that reflects who you actually were, what you actually valued, and how you actually lived, not some curated, edited version that hides all the struggle and uncertainty and failure. Like when I think about my teaching career, there are absolutely things that I would do differently if I could go back. Students I didn't serve as well as I could have, or opportunities I missed to really help someone. Times I was impatient or distracted or just going through the motions. But those mistakes are also what taught me how to be a better teacher. The student I didn't help in the way they needed showed me how to be more attentive to different learning styles. A well-lived life isn't one where you never fail or mess up. It's one where you stay engaged enough to learn from the failure, to let your mistakes teach you something, to use what goes wrong as material for growth rather than evidence that you're not good enough. So then, if a well-lived life isn't about perfection or the absence of regret, well, what's it about then? What are the actual elements that seem to matter when you're taking stock? Well, for me, it's the people I've loved, not just the romantic love, though that's a part of it, but all the relationships where there's been genuine connection, genuine care, genuine showing up for each other. The friends who have seen me at my worst and stuck around, or family members I've laughed with until we cried. The students who trusted me. And it's not about how many people or the length of relationships necessarily. It's about the quality of presence you brought to those connections. Were you actually there? Did you show up authentically? Did you let yourself be known and take the risk of knowing others? And then there's the music I've made. And I don't just mean the recordings that exist or the performances that went well. I mean all of it. The songs I wrote that helped me understand my own feelings. The practice sessions where I discovered something new about my instrument. The times I played music with other people and felt that particular kind of connection that only happens through shared creation. It's more about the doing than the achievement. The hours spent in pursuit of something beautiful or meaningful or true, regardless of whether it reached an audience or got recognized or led anywhere externally measurable. And the stories I've shared, this podcast is part of that. But so are all of the conversations with students, with friends, with strangers who became friends through sharing experiences. The times I've been honest about my own struggles and had someone say, "Hey, me too." And suddenly we both felt a little less alone. And the laughter that I've carried, the moments of genuine, unguarded joy, the inside jokes with people I'm close to, the times something struck me as absurd or beautiful or ridiculous enough to laugh about, those moments of lightness that punctuate the heavier work of being human. And maybe most important in recent years anyway, the moments of peace I've learned to notice. Not constant happiness or the absence of difficulty, but those brief instances of feeling okay with what is, of not struggling against reality or just being present and finding that that's enough. And learning to notice those moments is itself a practice. They were probably always there, but I was too busy striving or worrying or planning to actually register them. And now I try to pause when they happen, to feel what peace actually feels like and to encode that experience so that I can return to it. So then what makes a life well lived? For me, it's this whole combination. Love given and received, work that felt meaningful, stories that created connection, laughter that lightened the weight of existence, and peace that came from learning to be present with what is. And the more I think about this question, the more I come back to one central principle: participation over perfection. A well-lived life isn't one where everything goes right. It's one where you show up fully for what actually happens. Participation means engaging with your actual circumstances rather than waiting for ideal circumstances. It means working with what you have rather than waiting until you have more. It means being present for the life that's actually happening rather than the life you think should be happening. When I started teaching guitar seriously, I didn't have any formal teaching credentials. I could have waited until I got certified, until I got fully qualified, until I had, more years of experience, but instead I started teaching with what I knew, learning as I went and letting the practice of teaching make me a better teacher. If I had waited for perfect conditions, more training, more experience, more confidence, I'd still be waiting. The participation itself created the growth. The doing is what taught me to do better. And participation requires risk. You might fail. You might look like an idiot. You might get hurt. But the alternative, protecting yourself by not engaging, by staying on the sidelines, by keeping your heart closed, it might be safer, but it's also far emptier. Participation means showing up as you actually are, not as you wish you were. Bringing your uncertainty, your questions, your work in progress self. Not waiting until you're fully formed or completely healed or entirely confident. When I started this podcast, I didn't have it all figured out. I still don't. I'm working through these questions in real time, sharing the process of trying to understand life rather than presenting conclusions from a place of having already understood it. And that's vulnerable, but it's also honest. A well-lived life is messy because life is messy. It involves showing up even when you're unsure, loving even when you might get hurt, creating even when you might fail, giving even when you might not get anything back. But the alternative, waiting for certainty, protecting yourself from all risk, only engaging when success is guaranteed, that leads to a smaller, safer, less satisfying life. You avoid pain, but you also avoid meaning. You protect yourself from disappointment, but you also exclude possibility. So then, I think participation takes courage. The courage to be imperfect in public, to not know what you're doing, to try things that might not work out than to care about things even though caring makes you vulnerable. And I'm still practicing this, still catching myself waiting for better conditions, more certainty, feeling more ready, and then reminding myself, this is it. This is the life I have. These are the conditions. Participate now or keep waiting and then maybe never start. And here's what I've discovered. Meaningful participation is available right now. Not after you achieve something or fix something or become someone different, but right now. With exactly what you have, exactly who you are, exactly where you are. And it doesn't have to be grand. Participating fully in a conversation with a friend, being completely present during a simple meal, giving your full attention to a piece of music. These ordinary moments of full engagement, there is what a well-lived life is made of. You don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to be present, engaged, and authentic, and generous with what you have. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That is a life well lived. Anyway, it's now time for this week's segment of enrichment, exploring some wisdom about the good life that spans centuries and cultures. Did you know that ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle defined a good life as one of eudaimonia, a word often translated as happiness, but which actually means something closer to human flourishing or living well. And for Aristotle, it wasn't about feeling happy all the time. It was about living with purpose, balance, and virtue. And what makes me think, and even a little sad about this, is how different it is from our modern conception of happiness as a feeling state to pursue. Aristotle's eudaimonia is about how you're living, not how you're feeling. It's about the quality of your character and choices, not the presence or absence of pleasure. And it's really a lesson we've lost, or at least one that we're still trying to figure out thousands of years later. And here's something from modern research. Studies of people on their deathbeds show that most common regrets aren't about what they did, but what they didn't do. Not risks they took that failed, but risks that they didn't take. And not mistakes they made, but opportunities they missed out of fear. And that suggests something very important about what makes a life well lived. It's not about avoiding all mistakes or doing things you're sure will work out. It's about engaging fully, taking meaningful risks, saying yes to possibility even when the outcome is uncertain. And here is a fascinating finding. Researchers studying the world's blue zones, which are regions where people live the longest and the healthiest, found that longevity isn't primarily diet or exercise. It's about purpose, community, and having reasons to get up in the morning. People live longer when their lives feel meaningful and connected. So anyway, all signs seem to point to a life well lived isn't about pleasure or achievement or avoiding pain. It's about purpose, connection, virtue, and full engagement with being alive. And for this week's music check-in, I just want to talk about what music has taught me about living well. I think music is a good metaphor for life, actually. A good song isn't one where everything is perfect. It's one where there's honesty and emotion and connection, where the imperfections often make it more human, more relatable, and definitely more real. So I've stopped trying to make perfect music and started trying to make honest music. Songs that capture what I'm actually experiencing or feeling or thinking about. Not polished to the point where all personality is removed, but just a little raw enough that you can hear a real person is still inside them. And the same with performance. The best shows aren't the ones that, everything is played perfectly. For me, they're the ones where I'm fully present, where there's a genuine connection with the audience, and where something real is happening in the moment, even if there are a few technical mistakes. And, watching students over the years has taught me this too. The ones who progress most aren't the ones who are most naturally talented or who practice the most. They're the ones who stay engaged, who bring curiosity and presence to the work, who are willing to sound bad while they're learning something new. And I think living well is like that too. Not about being the most talented or the most disciplined or the most making no mistakes, but about staying engaged, bringing presence to what you're doing, and being willing to be imperfect while you're learning and growing. Anyway, you can hear music made with this philosophy in mind, presence over perfection, honesty over polish, on my Spotify, Apple Music, or even right here on YouTube. The links are always right here in the channel description if you're curious. Or, of course, if you would just like to help out a fellow human. Incidentally, there's something you may not actually have given too much thought about, but one flick of your screen on a subscribe or a follow button, it's really nothing for you. It doesn't cost you anything. The effort is extremely minimal, and it's definitely not terribly time consuming, but that one tiny little act of yours, it can actually change someone's life. And I actually know this for a fact now. Anyway, it's just something to think about. So that, my friends, is episode 15. Grappling with the biggest question, the one that sits underneath so many others. What makes a life well lived? And we've explored why it's not about perfection or the absence of regret, what elements seem to actually matter, and why participation might be more important than achievement. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I'm living well enough to have authority on this at all. I'm still figuring it out, still making mistakes, still sometimes prioritizing things that don't actually matter while neglecting things that certainly do. But maybe that's okay too. Maybe this is a question we're all working on together, learning through lived experience what actually creates meaning, what actually feels worthwhile when you take stock. So what do you think? What makes a life well lived for you? What have your experiences taught you about what matters and what doesn't? And what would you want people to remember about how you showed up in the world? Send me a message, leave me a comment, or just spend some time thinking about it yourself when you're offline, reflecting the way that I'm sure you are. These are the questions worth sitting with. They're worth revisiting as you gain more perspective on your own life. And if you're worried you're not living well enough, not doing enough, not being enough, remember, you don't have to be extraordinary. You just have to participate. A life well lived isn't something you achieve once and then you're done. It's something you practice daily in small choices about how you show up, who to be, who to care about, what to do with the very little time that you actually have. So love anyway. Create something. Show up for people. Be present for your own life instead of waiting for a better one to begin. And that's enough. That's what makes it all worth it. And of course, while you're practicing that art of living well, in whatever way that means to you, please have yourself a safe and happy week.